So I'll just hit record here and we'll get cruising for the afternoon. So hopefully all of you are in the right place today and wanting to attend this webinar on diabetes and learning about risk. My name is Nikki Johnson, and I'm going to be kind of leading us through this conversation today. So I am an extension educator and community health and nutrition specialist with the University of Minnesota Extension and North Dakota State University Extension. I am also a registered dietitian, and I would say that I spend a good majority of my time in work thinking about diabetes prevention, helping individuals, communities, and organizations really understand what diabetes prevention is all about and making sure that we can connect people to the services that they need for prevention. So today, this is kind of our outline. I should point out, I'm pretty informal. If there are things that you want to ask or learn or just need a little bit more information about, please feel free to add it in the chat and I'll try to answer things along the way. But I'm going to start us off here with asking you all a question and just wondering why you are participating in today's webinar. Is this just for you? Is this something that you want to share with someone else in your personal life, maybe a parent or a sibling or a spouse, maybe a friend? Is this for personal use? Or is it maybe a mix of both? Curious. Why are you here today? Go ahead and add that to the chat. Sometimes it helps me to give better answers if I know who you are. if I know who you're wanting to learn more about or help. Great, thank you. Lots of personal use. Good. Okay, so today, here's what we're going to cover in a very informal form. We're going to learn about prediabetes as well as diabetes and the risk factors for developing type 2. I know that's what a lot of you kind of indicated as something that you wanted to learn a little bit more about. Promise you, we will cover that. We're also going to take some time to take the pre-diabetes risk test. So before all of you leave today, you are actually going to have a number that's going to give you some guidance on whether or not you're at risk and how high your level of risk is for developing type 2 or prediabetes. And then, of course, I'm not just going to leave you there. We're also going to talk about some steps to lowering your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. So with that, we're going to start off with some basics today. Okay, a little bit of history. It just tends to help make things feel a little bit easier, make things a little bit easier to understand. So our basics. Our body requires energy in order to function, right? Every cell needs some sort of fuel to do its job, whether that's your muscles and helping you to walk down the street, the cells of your lungs that are helping you to breathe, or even the cells of your skin and having to repair a wound or something like that. So to get that fuel for those cells or that energy, we need food, right? We need food. Food is our energy source. So all of the foods that we eat are made up of a mix of nutrients. There are going to be 3 different types of nutrients that give us energy, and we like to call those macronutrients. We also have a whole load of what we call micronutrients, like vitamins and minerals. And I usually like to think of those micronutrients as helpers, okay? They're the helpers of the body. They might help to deliver a macronutrient to a different place in the body. They might help to break down something within the body, but essentially their job is to help. Now, our body needs a nice combination of macronutrients as well as micronutrients. When we think about the macronutrients, these are the ones that are going to actually give us energy. That's the parts of the food that we can break down that's going to fuel all those cells. And when we think about a combination of those micronutrients, or excuse me, those macronutrients, the ones that give us the energy, we want the category that we want the most of is going to be our carbohydrates. So 45% to 65% of the food that we eat should be made up of carbohydrates. Did anybody realize that? That's the macronutrient that our body needs the most. We also need a nice mix of protein. 10% to 35% of our energy should come from protein, and then 20% to 35% of our energy should come from fat. Okay, so a nice mix. Now, when we are eating our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our fats, after we've been eating them, they're going to be broken down into even smaller pieces that are going to travel through our body into our blood and get delivered to cells for that energy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to talk just a bit more on carbohydrates, because as I mentioned, carbohydrates are going to be the category of macronutrients that we want the most of. That's where we're going to get a good majority of our calories. So I'm curious, again, I want you to add to the chat here, but what comes to your mind when you hear the word carbohydrates or carbs? What comes to mind? Don't eat too many. Breads and sugars, sugar, pasta, energy, keto. Thanks for adding that, Amy. The good stuff, favorite foods. Oh, I like that. Okay, thanks, Linda. Defining between good carbs, bad carbs, sure. The supposed enemy of anyone on a diet. Okay. I'm not surprised at all to see these answers, right? A lot of times carbohydrates get a really bad reputation, but I really do want to emphasize that they are important for our overall health. The one thing that I like to think about when I think about carbohydrates and using them as fuel for our body, the most important thing to remember is that quality carbohydrates is really going to be what matters. So let's take a deeper look into that carbohydrate family. So the carb family actually has a lot of members. A lot of times our mind might go directly to some of our more processed foods. Like I always think of maybe those empty calories or those sugars like donuts, cookies, cakes, those types of things. But in reality, a lot of our carbohydrate rich foods are going to be really, really nutritious for us. Grains, especially whole grains, things like oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, those are going to be really rich in carbohydrates and are also going to provide us with a lot of those micronutrients that our bodies love, need, and crave. Vegetables, fruits, beans, peas, lentils, also all really nutritious foods are going to be really rich in carbohydrates. Milk is another category. Sometimes people don't realize that milk also has carbohydrates in it, but all of these are going to give us with essential nutrients that our bodies need. And again, will be broken down through digestion and used for energy. And the thing about carbohydrates is that we need to have carbohydrate rich foods daily. Okay, we need to replenish this stockpile of carbohydrates. Oh man, I'm going to get that wrong all afternoon. We need to replenish that every single day. And again, when we think about carbohydrates, quality does matter. So I always like to say choose whole foods more often than those processed foods. So again, whole grains, popcorn, oatmeal, brown rice, greens, fruit, strawberries, grapes, all those kind of things. Those we want to choose more often than say the cookies, cakes, bars, and the more processed carbohydrate foods. So as I mentioned, when we are eating these foods, those carbohydrates, the main goal of the digestion of those carbohydrates is to break them into those small pieces or these molecules. Most of the time, that breakdown of the carbohydrates is going to give us glucose, okay? And when that food is breaking down, the glucose is going to enter our bloodstream. I know this gets a little bit technical, but it's going to enter our bloodstream. And what's essentially, it's going to be sitting there being ready to be delivered to our different cells to use for energy. So we eat our food. It's going to get broken down through digestion to give us this glucose that's going to float around in our blood. And eventually we want it to be delivered to our cells for energy. Now, what I think is really cool, so sometimes when we hear glucose, we might immediately have some sort of negative connotation to it. But in reality, every single cell in our body depends on glucose for fuel. So glucose is good. We need it. We need it. Our brain and our nervous system use glucose almost exclusively. Like that's what those cells want and need. Where glucose might get a little bit tricky sometimes is because the goal for that glucose in our blood is to stay at sort of a steady level or a fairly nice little wavy level. So when it's entering the cells when it's needed, and it's not just going to have too much glucose floating around in the blood or too little glucose floating around in the blood. So this stability of glucose in our blood is something that our body attempts to achieve all on its own, but sometimes it's not possible. So we're going to get into that in just a minute here. So you might be asking, how is that glucose in our blood getting into the cells to be used as energy? That's where insulin comes in. So in order for glucose to go from our blood to our cells to be used for that energy, we need the help of a special hormone known as insulin. So this insulin is made in our pancreas and essentially helps to move the glucose into the cells of the body. By moving the glucose into the cells are then fueled and our blood glucose levels are maintained. It's kind of cool, right? So again, we need those carbohydrates because they're needed for that essential fuel for our bodies. Those carbs are broken down into smaller molecules, one of which is glucose. And that glucose then is delivered to our cells by insulin. And those cells use the glucose for energy. So I'm a visual person. So I figured let's make a really cute picture diagram of thinking about that, about thinking of these foods being broken down. So we're going to start off with eating our food, right? We're going to eat our food and it's going to be digested and it's going to turn into glucose in our blood. It's going to float around in our blood until it gets paired up with insulin. And essentially that insulin is the delivery truck driver, and it's going to help take that blood to all the different cells throughout our body. And again, remember, the brain especially uses glucose, so it's its favorite fuel to use, but it'll deliver it to our muscles, our heart, and every other cell within our body. Now, what happens if our body isn't really able to use that insulin the way it's supposed to, or maybe we're not making enough of it? That's where diabetes comes into play. So overall, diabetes is defined as a disease where the body has trouble moving the glucose from the blood into the cells for energy, okay? There's some sort of disruption there. And there are three main types of diabetes. We've got type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. So let's start off with type 1. So in type 1 diabetes, a long time ago, we used to call this juvenile diabetes because it typically occurred in children. We do know, though, that type 1 can be developed at any age. But what happens is that your body, that pancreas, isn't able to make the insulin that it needs. So if you can't make the insulin, that glucose in your blood can't get moved into the cells for energy. So a person with type 1 diabetes might feel really, really tired if their blood glucose levels are goofy. They're probably not going to feel very good. With type 1 diabetes, this is nothing that you can prevent. Okay, this is just something where the body is unable to make that insulin on its own. So not preventable. We can't help it. Type 2 diabetes is going to be the most common type of diabetes. And it's triggered oftentimes by a combination of controllable as well as uncontrollable factors. Things like family history, race, weight, physical activity. But this is where the body has insulin. So your body's able to make that insulin, but it's not using it the right way. It's not able to do its job the way that we want to. So again, we end up seeing too much glucose in our blood. Again, type 2 can develop at any age. Kids can get type 2 diabetes, adults can get type 2 diabetes. The risk does increase with age, but it can happen at any time. But I think the part that I like to focus on the most with type 2 is that in most cases, this can be prevented. So while type 2 is the most common, there are steps to prevention. You don't have to develop type 2. You can prevent it or at least delay it, the development of that. The third category is a lot like type 2, where the body is not able to use that insulin properly. However, it is kind of defined or limited to time of pregnancy. So some of you ladies out there might have had gestational diabetes, and that's where our body just isn't able to use that insulin properly during pregnancy. So today, we've got about 37 million people, or about 1 in 10 people in the United States that have diabetes, and those numbers continue to rise. Couple of things when I think about having type 2 diabetes, and again, I'll focus more on that because that is our preventable type. But when you end up with diabetes, you are increasing your risk of developing other serious health issues, such as blindness, kidney failure, heart disease, stroke, and even nerve damage. Uncontrolled diabetes can also cause damage to blood vessels, which can cause healing to happen a lot more slowly. And small wounds can turn into major infections. In addition to the health concerns associated with diabetes, there's also some significant health costs that come along with it. On average, a person with diabetes spends about $13,700 for medical expenses in a year. And that's about 2.3 times higher than a healthy individual. So we really, if we can prevent it, we want to, right? Now, let's take that maybe down a notch. So before a person ends up with type 2 diabetes, a lot of times you're going to have prediabetes. And this is where you have blood glucose that is higher than normal, but it's not quite high enough to be considered type 2 diabetes. This is even more common in the US. So there are 96 million, just think about that for a second, 96 million Americans approximately that have prediabetes. Okay, so not quite type 2, but definitely an indicator that you could be on your way. If we break that down a little bit more, that's about 1 in 3 people. So on our call today, we have just under 90 people. So that means it is very likely that about 30 people on this call have prediabetes. What's maybe scary or a little bit alarming about that is that the majority of people who have prediabetes don't even know it. So 84% of adults that have prediabetes don't know it. And if you don't know you have something, right, how can you make a change? We want to be able to make some changes because without intervention, people with prediabetes are often going to end up with type 2 within the next 5 years. So if we know we have prediabetes, we can make some changes. So I've got another question here for you. If you were going to imagine someone who has prediabetes, what do you think their symptoms would be? What do you think their symptoms would be? Okay, I'm seeing here some symptoms. Maybe feeling tired, maybe they're overweight, thirst, milder symptoms. I saw a couple had put no symptoms, tired, dry mouth. I love all the guessing. Great. You would think they would have a lot of symptoms similar to a person with diabetes. However, most of the time, a person with prediabetes isn't going to have any symptoms. And because of that, because you usually aren't going to experience any symptoms, you're not going to just wake up one morning feeling a certain type of way. You really need to understand then instead the risk factors. Understanding the risk factors for prediabetes and diabetes is really important. So let's take a look at some of these big ones here. First up is going to be age. So as we get older, our risk for developing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes increases. Current research says that risk typically is going to happen around age 45. You're going to see a little bump in the chance of developing type 2, and then every year subsequently after that. Your sex is also going to be a factor. So men are more likely to get type 2 diabetes, and oftentimes at a lower weight than women. And that's in part because men typically store their fat around their abdomen. Okay, so having that stored fat or that belly fat is going to put them at greater risk for developing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Family history also increases your risk for developing type 2. Now, the reasoning behind this isn't completely understood at this time. But what we do know is that if you have a parent or a sibling with type 2, that your risk is higher than a person with no family history. Now, I know several of you mentioned right away, like, hey, I've got family history. That is not a sentence. That's not saying, okay, my mom had diabetes, I'm going to get diabetes too. It doesn't mean that. It does increase your chances, but it doesn't seal your fate. Okay, remember, it's a combination of maybe some of those factors we can't change with some of the factors that we can. We also know that high blood pressure is going to be a risk factor. And that's because people with high blood pressure or hypertension also typically have some type of insulin resistance or have that issue with the body figuring out or being able to use that insulin the way it needs to. If you've ever had gestational diabetes or given birth to a baby that weighed over 9 pounds, you're also going to see an increased risk for developing prediabetes. I didn't list it on here, but there is another factor, and that is your race and ethnicity. If you are African American, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian or Alaska Native person, even some Pacific Islander or Asian American individuals are also at higher risk. Some of that also has to do with where you hold some of your fat or extra weight if it's in your abdomen area. So if you notice the first section of our diagram here, these are going to be factors we don't have a whole lot of control over, right? I'm always going to get older. Every year I'm going to get a little bit older. I can't change my family history, right? But activity level and weight are also going to be risk factors, and those are things we have a little bit of control over. So if you are active less than 3 times per week for 30 minutes at a time, you're going to have an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. In addition, if you are overweight or obese, we're going to see an increased risk. Okay, so all of these combined are going to be our major risk factors for developing type 2 or prediabetes. So with that, let's figure out our own risk. So what I'd like for y'all to do, you can either keep track on your fingers if you like, or if you've got a little scratch piece of paper, maybe you want to jot down a couple of notes. We're going to do a little risk test here. We're going to find out how high your risk is for having prediabetes. So first one, checking out the age here. How old are you? If you're less than 40, 0 points. If you're between the ages of 40 and 49, make a little tally mark for 1. If you're between the ages of 50 and 59, 2 tallies. And if you're 60 years or older, you're going to give yourself 3 tally marks. Next, are you a man or a woman? If you are a man, you're going to want to give yourself a single point. Woman, 0. This is for the ladies. If you are a woman, have you ever been diagnosed with gestational diabetes? And this is ever. Have you ever had a pregnancy where you had gestational diabetes? 1 point for yes, 0 points for no. Next up is thinking about that family history. Do you have a mother, father, sister, or brother with diabetes? 1 point for yes, 2 points for no. Or excuse me, not 2 points for no. Woo, try that again. 0 points for no. 0 points for no. Have you ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure? 1 point for yes, 0 points for no. Are you physically active? Okay, so again, oh, I goofed this one up, guys. I got to go back. Hold on. I moved my numbers around the wrong way. If you are physically active, you get 0 points. Sorry about that. Don't read the slide. If you're physically active, 0 points. If you are not physically active, 1 point. Okay, and again, that's 3 times a week or more. I promise I'll fix that slide before I send it out to all of you. I'll also give you the risk test. And then the final piece here is going to be weight. What is your weight status? So for this, you're going to want to find your height in one of the light blue columns there and kind of draw a line across the screen, if you will, to figure out your weight category. Now, weight is the #1 risk for developing type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. So if a person is overweight or obese, their risk for diabetes increases. And that exact linkage isn't fully understood, but we know that oftentimes when we're overweight, our bodies aren't able to use that insulin as well as it should be able to. And it's because of that that you'll see different point levels based upon your height and your weight. How are we doing? Everybody got their points? Now, I want you to tally it up. Tally it up. If you scored a 5, oh, good question, Jeremy. On this chart, we don't have anything over 6.4, but I can get you the calculations for that if that's what you need. Just shoot me a message. I can get you those numbers. So if you scored a 5 or higher, you don't have to add it to the chat. This is just for your own knowledge, but you're very likely to have prediabetes and are at high risk for developing type 2. So 5 or higher. Not necessarily a lot of wiggle room in there. So before we talk about what that means, I do want to do just a quick little check-in, because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was at high risk. I just want to do a check-in. How are you feeling right now? Were you surprised, not surprised, doing okay? Ready to learn more, a little bit nervous? Okay, thanks for the honesty there, Erin. Not surprised. Okay, some goods. I figured we'd see a little mix of emotions today. Whatever you're feeling, it's normal, okay? And you're not alone if you saw that you had that score of 5 or higher. Remember, there's 96 million Americans out there with prediabetes. And maybe you don't yet. Let's figure out what those next steps should be, okay? So anytime a person scores 5 or higher, so if that's you, my first suggestion is always to go and get some blood work done. Go in to get that blood work to confirm whether or not you fall into that prediabetes or diabetes range, or even if you're normal, okay? So go in to see your primary care physician, make a call. If you don't have a primary care physician, there are other options out there for you to get things checked out. Sometimes even your local pharmacy will do a quick little blood check for either your A1C or a fasting blood sugar test to see where your levels are at. I included this chart here just as a reference. So you can see what numbers are considered to be a normal blood glucose level, what's considered to be prediabetes, and what's considered to be diabetes. Okay, so first step, if you have that 5 or higher, go get a blood test. If you are still sitting there in a sort of panic or you're feeling a little bit nervous, I do have really good news for you. Pre-diabetes is reversible, which is just It's super cool, right? It doesn't mean you are destined to end up with type 2 diabetes. If you are willing to make some changes and are able to make some changes, you can significantly reduce your risk. So let's talk about that. Where can we make changes? Well, we know that there were those 5 risk factors that we can't change. That's just what's going to happen. But there are some modifiable adjustments that we can make. So the biggest thing is that data shows that lifestyle changes, things like weight loss, healthy eating, increased physical activity, can really help to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes. So food choices, activity level, weight, those are the biggest things that we can do. So what does that look like, these lifestyle changes that we would maybe need to be making? What's going to help us to reduce our risk? The first thing is going to be some moderate weight loss. As I mentioned earlier, if you are overweight or obese, our body isn't able to use that insulin as well as it's supposed to. But if we can lose just 5 to 7% of your current weight, that might mean losing 10 pounds if you weigh 200 pounds, just a weight loss of 10 pounds. We're not talking about a crazy makeover here. But that 5 to 7%, you can significantly reduce your risk for developing type 2 diabetes, and you can get your blood glucose levels back to normal. Okay, so a very moderate weight loss. One way you might be able to do that, and also even if you don't lose a single pound, one way you can reduce your risk is by choosing healthier foods, creating a healthier eating pattern. Again, that might be choosing more whole foods rather than processed foods. Thinking about whole grains, fruits, and vegetables rather than our highly processed things. It also is being mindful of proper portion sizes, right? Making sure we're not consuming too much all at once. We're eating the right portion sizes that are needed for our body. So quality of our food choices is going to help us in a couple of different ways. By choosing whole foods, we can help to keep our blood sugar from peaks and valleys. So instead of our blood sugar going really, really high and dipping really low, it can help us to do more of this rolling wave. And it does that in a couple of ways. So whole foods tend to have more fiber. Again, think whole grains, fruits, veggies, those types of things. And our bodies view those as being a little bit complex. So it takes a little bit of extra time to kind of break it down. And that means that as it takes a little bit more time to break down the food into that glucose. So that happens more gradually, which again, it's going to keep a nice wave for us instead of those peaks and valleys. But by having those foods, those whole foods that also contain a lot of fiber, it's going to make you feel fuller longer. So it's going to help to make you want to eat a little bit less. And then the final thing on here is thinking about physical activity and increasing that physical activity. The recommendation is to move our body for at least 150 minutes of physical activity per week. Now, if you're not currently physically active, we don't want you to do this all at once. It's something we want you to do really slowly. So start by working in movement for maybe 10-minute chunks, 15-minute chunks, or even 30-minute chunks at a time. Don't go overboard, okay? Slow and steady. Now, maybe as you're thinking about these lifestyle changes, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm still feeling a little bit uncertain. I'm nervous, right? It's okay. Again, you are not alone. And I just want you to know that there are other resources out there. And one that I really, really want to highlight today is the National Diabetes Prevention Program. So again, this is a national program. And what it is, it's a lifestyle change program that is proven to reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and help you to reverse prediabetes if you already have it. So the program is really designed to give you tools to make gradual changes to develop lifelong healthy habits. This is not a quick fix. The National Diabetes Prevention Program first was being studied back in the late 90s, and it's still around today. But what's really cool about this is that the program was found to be really successful back then, but since then it's been evaluated and reevaluated for its effectiveness. It's still useful. There's been several updates over the years, but really the one thing that remains constant is that the program is effective. And for individuals who complete this program, they can see a risk reduction, like pause, dramatic pause here. You can see a risk reduction of 58%. Yeah, 58%. If you're older than 60, that risk reduction is going to be even better. And you can see a 71% risk reduction. So this program is incredibly, incredibly effective. And just my own personal experience. So I've led this program for many years and helped educators across the state also lead this program. And while I can give you the statistics, that 58% reduction and that 71% reduction, I've seen firsthand the transformations and the success stories that our participants get to live, which is really, really cool. So I want to tell you just a little bit more about the program itself. So the National Diabetes Prevention Program is a year-long program. It's an entire year. And we like people to experience an entire year because the whole year is very different, right? Many of us are, I saw we're from Minnesota. It would not be good for me to just take a class in the summer because you know what? I'm really active in the summer. It's beautiful outside. I want to walk around. What does that mean for me in my activity if I'm stuck indoors because it's negative 30 out, right? We want you to be able to experience the whole year and really understand how these lifestyle changes can be implemented at every season of life. The program is really focused around gradual changes. I think I said this already, but slow and steady really wins the race. Nothing in this program happens quickly. We really want people to have sustainable change, okay? And the program gives you a variety of different tools and goes over a whole load of topics. We talk about healthy eating. What does that mean for you? What does that look like for you in your life? We talk about stress. How does stress affect your overall health? How does it affect your food choices, your movement, things like that? We talk about physical activity, what that looks like in your life and how that can reduce your risk. And then on top of that, we also talk about those social and emotional elements of healthy behaviors. You know, it's football season right now. How do I successfully maintain my health goals if it's tailgating? Or it's the holiday season is right around the corner. How on earth am I supposed to navigate those holidays with all that extra food and a crazy schedule? Well, this program helps to give you those tools. Okay. And in combination, this time frame, all of these tools, we're really helping our participants or the people that go through the program do a few different things. The biggest one being we want you to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes. And again, I already told you it's very effective. But we also want to see a reduction of your blood sugar levels. We want to see those go back to normal. Our other goals are going to be working on that weight reduction and increase of physical activity. Okay, so by being a part of this program, you would help to improve all of those risk factors that I mentioned that were modifiable when we think about type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. So you might be wondering, like, why does this program work? Why is this so effective? Well, I think it's because of a variety of reasons. The first, I mentioned, this is not a quick fix. It's also not a diet. This is not a diet. If you join this type of program, you would never be told, hey, you can't have this food anymore. Okay. All of the foods that you love can still be a part of a healthy eating pattern. So this is not a diet. Everything within the program is very individualized. So while we are meeting as a group and learning all together, everybody's plan for making those behavior changes is going to look a little bit different. What works for me isn't going to work for you and your neighbor, right? Everybody's going to have something a little bit different, and you get that individualized support in the program. You've got a group of people behind you. So this happens in a team setting or a group setting where you're meeting with folks weekly to learn from each other, go through challenges and talk about successes, those types of things. Each week you also get personalized feedback from a lifestyle coach that's leading the program. And I think one of the coolest things about this program is that you celebrate all the successes. Maybe all you did this week was move your treadmill from the garage to the house. Or maybe you just finally took all the clothes, it's not a glorified clothes hanger anymore. Maybe that's all it is. That's a success. All of those little steps lead to change. So I'm hoping this works for us, but I want to play just a really brief little video for you of Cynthia Johnson, who was a program participant. So I was kind of telling you all about the wonderfulness that this program is, but I want to let you hear it from somebody else too.
I was overweight, making all the wrong choices, knew that I should be doing something, but I wasn't motivated to do so. I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with prediabetes. I have high blood pressure, my A1C is high. My doctor advised me that I needed to make some changes in my life. I joined the class so that I can get support in the goal of losing weight, eating better, and also exercising more. I enjoy the class. We have a lot of laughs. I've learned that I need to be in a group setting because we support each other, we help each other, and everybody has a different perspective on the same situation, and we share information. Our class coach, Cynthia, is amazing. She's a very positive person. She is our cheerleader, if you will. She tells us that even though we make mistakes, they're not permanent, that we can learn from them and grow from them and maybe make different choices in the future. Against all odds, I've lost some weight. I have started to work out a little better. I've had more energy. I am walking more, and I am actually looking for other things to do to increase my physical activity along with eating better. I'm more conscious of what I need to do to take care of myself. It's not about how long you live, it's about how well you live. I prevent T2 for me so that I can live a long and healthy life.
So that was just Cynthia's story. Like I said, I just thought that was a nice thing to hear and see that is a success. And that is not atypical. We see these types of stories all the time with this program. So if you're wondering, how on earth can I find a class like this? Like, this sounds like something I want to be a part of. Know that there are a lot of opportunities out there, extension being one of them. I plan to share with you some registration information and links in our follow-up email later this afternoon. So if you're interested in learning about a class, I know that we have several that are coming up. I think even a couple of our lifestyle coaches and educators might be on the call today, but know that I will send out some information about some extension classes. Great thing about these classes is they're oftentimes free. Extension classes for sure are free. There are other community organizations that offer classes as well. I will give you some information on those classes. And if you can't find information in those two channels, the Center for Disease Control also has a registry of programs that are available. So with that, I'm just curious if you found anything that you are ready to take action on today, whether that's for yourself, you simply want to let somebody else know. I'm just curious, what's one action you want to take today as that you want to take today as a result of today's webinar? Go ahead, add that to the chat. One action you want to take. Dust off that treadmill. Love this. Great. I will offer some questions or leave some time for questions here, but I know we're getting close on time. So I wanted to include just a final few last thoughts. I will give you all some resources in a follow-up email later today. But if you are in need of a certificate of participation, I can get that for you as well. All you have to do is follow or click that evaluation link that I just added to the chat here. In addition, if you are a University of Minnesota employee and are looking for some well-being points, one of the best things that you can do is take that evaluation as well, and we'll make sure that you get a certificate and can get those well-being points. And finally, I wanted to just give a little shout out. We do have several other upcoming webinars that you might be interested in. We've got our webinars in Spanish with the dates there. We also have a couple of other series, Finding Balance, Later Life Decision Making, No Place Like Home, Recovery and Health, and one final What's for Dinner webinar. Oh, the Z-link is not correct for this webinar. Well, give me a second. I will make sure I get it for you. I thought I had the right one there. Well, what on earth? Sarah, I think you're still on here.
Yes, we will get that added. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. I will resend out the link via email. I'm sorry about that, folks. We'll make sure that you can get your well-being points and that certificate. I promise you that. So with that, that is all I have for you today. As I mentioned, I will stick around in case you have some questions about anything that you heard today.